Hello everyone, and welcome to our session today, the top 5 resume mistakes nurses make when applying for a job. Our presenters are Nicole Nash-Arnold and Paul Armstrong. Nicole Nash-Arnold is a nursing career coach who helps great nurses transform into respected leaders. She shares her 15 years of experience in both senior and executive health leadership roles to germinate great leadership. Clinically, Nicole has over 10 years perioperative experience before moving into her nurse educator and management roles. Currently, she manages a privately owned emergency department in Brisbane. She has postgraduate qualifications in perioperative nursing and currently a Master's in Nursing. Nicole is a member of the International Coaches Federation. Paul Armstrong is the founder and director of Inner Sanctum Career Consulting. Paul Armstrong is an experienced and qualified career practitioner. Paul has an extensive background in administration of elite sport, in particular with Australian rules football. He has also been a teacher, development coordinator and AFL football manager. His most recent connection with the AFL was in a role where he managed the transition of AFL coaches, a position he enjoyed for over 5 years. Paul is a professional member of the Career Development Association of Australia and the Geelong Chamber of Commerce. Paul and Nicole, welcome to the microphone.
Thank you very much, Sue. Thank you. Paul and I are here today to talk about resumes this time. We've talked last week about the top 5 nurses mistakes that nurses make at interview, and this time we're going to talk about the job application mistakes that nurses make. There are 3 main stages to getting a job. The first one is you have to be career ready for it. So you need to make sure that you've got the skills and the experience necessary and that you've had ample opportunity to demonstrate those skills in acting roles, maybe in some projects, some working parties, so that you can adequately fulfill that role. The next part is the great resume, and that's what we're going to cover today. Because the truth is a great resume won't get you a job, but it most certainly will take you out of the running for one. So we're going to take you through all of the things that you need to make sure that you're appointable. The only other thing that you need when you're applying for a job is to nail the interview. So you've got the right credentials. The panel is keen to talk to you after seeing the great resume we're going to give you today. And then the final stage is you being able to talk the talk. So often the problem that nurses find is that the process that is involved in applying for the job can be quite seemingly bureaucratic, with panel interviews and key selection criteria and everything that goes along with that. And nurses don't often feel that they're best positioned to shine in this sort of forum. We are very practical people, so those sorts of processes are quite foreign to us. If you get this wrong, and particularly with the resume, then you fail to stand out amongst the crowd. And that means that you may be incorrectly categorised by a panel that's reviewing your resume as clinically below par, when in fact it might be just the document that's below par and you're perfect for that job. Also, and I think particularly nurses, they often shy away from selling themselves. And the truth is this little document called the CV is the best marketing package to sell all of the hard work, the long hours, the treacherous and grinding skill development that you've been through over all of this time that you can possibly have. So it's a good idea to really make it as good as you can possibly make it. So let's get into the first mistake. So number 1, the cover letter. That's pretty blah. There's not a lot going on in that cover letter. There's a couple of reasons why the cover letter ends up being a little paltry. It's often the last minute thing. People pore over the CV and get selection criteria. They make sure that font sizes are right, that they've got everything done. And then at the last minute, they think, oh, cover letter. I need to whip up a cover letter. And it's pretty obvious when you're reading it as a panel member that it has been whipped up at the last minute. Often people put in the cover letter just a rehash of what's already contained in the CV. And when that happens, there's not a lot that's compelling in there to make you turn the page. If the cover letter is ho-hum and there's nothing exciting in there, then there's what grandeur could a CV possibly hold? I read a cover letter recently that was extremely parochial in the way that it was written, and it was sort of written like it was a letter to a friend, and there wasn't any of the things that you would expect in a professional letter. And it was, oh, hi, I'm Nicole. I'm really excited to apply for this position. I just thought I'd give you a little bit of detail about myself. I love this and I love that, and I've done something else, and I had this situation come up the other day, and I tell you that because I think it demonstrates that I'm a this, and, you know, hope to talk to you soon. Thanks, Charlie. And it was pretty parochial, I think is a good word. Paul, what are some of the worst cover letters that you've seen?
Oh, I've seen a lot, Nick. Good afternoon, and hope you're well. I think that what the problem initially that people make is that their resume and their cover letter look like completely different documents. In other words, they don't match up the style. There should be presentation and style that's consistent with both. So use the same font, use the same language, so that one's just not tacked on. A lot of times mistakes that people make is they use the same resume for every job and just change the cover letter. Now, both documents need to change to be relevant to the job. The biggest mistake people make is they'll put dear sir or madam, or they'll put to whom it may concern. Look, it's even better to put, if you don't know the person, and you should do your very best to find out who the person is, at least put dear head of HR or whoever it might be, but address it to a role, even if you don't know the name, but don't ever just put to whom it may concern.
That's good.
So that's obviously a real problem. Other times, cover letters become too wordy. I read one once that was 2.5 pages, and it was only 3 paragraphs in 2.5 pages. Now, I'm not reading that if I'm a recruiter, so you've just wasted your time if you put something in that looks like that. And also, keep in mind that the cover letter is to draw attention to yourself. So just a bland cover letter saying, please find attached my resume to support my application for such and such, fantastic, great. 100 other people doing exactly the same thing. So make sure it stands out a little bit, and don't just repeat what you've put into your resume.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that the cover letter is what compels you to look at it further, and a really good, well-crafted, succinct, compelling cover letter will really stand you out from the maybe hundreds of others that a panel has received. So I love your point about tailor it to the employer. That's really important. I've seen lots of cover letters that people have sent me, and you can tell that it's a copy and paste. And in fact, sometimes they haven't even changed the hospital by omission as an error, but you can tell by the content that it is so broad, the way that the language is written, that it is just, I'll just send this out to, 5, 10, maybe 30 different places. So tailoring it to your employer is really important. And the succinct one page is really incredibly important too, because there's enough to read already when you're going through this process. So that's a really important part of it as well. I often say to people, when you're writing a cover letter, a good strategy is to write a 30-second infomercial about yourself. And this isn't what will be contained in the cover letter. It's just a really good start. So people will write in, if you were going to do that and do a little 30-second spot on you, then you're going to say who you are, what you do best, the things that you've done so far that make you really great, and the training that supported that. And then once you've written that 30-second infomercial, it's easy to draft that letter because it is the highlights about, succinct story about who you are. So that seems to have helped a lot of people as well. I often have this question, Paul, and I'm interested to know what advice you give people about this, about how to sign off a cover letter. Some people have got often just, not a terribly grand ending to it, and it's a bit truncated when it ends. And I've seen other people use a strategy of signing off in a way like, I look forward to further discussing my suitability in an interview. And I've had a lot of discussion with people who think that that shows confidence, or that it shows that you're presumptuous enough to think that you're going to get an interview. What do you think?
Oh, I think you need to be confident. You need to finish it off by saying something like, please find attached a copy of my resume, and I'd welcome the opportunity to discuss my experience and objectives with you further at your convenience. Or I look forward to discussing this application with you in the near future. Or a face-to-face conversation about my resume would be greatly appreciated. That's fine. I have no issue with that. That's not presumptuous at all. You want to get the job. So that's why you're applying in the first place. So you're fingers crossed that you're going to get the opportunity to sit there in front of them and talk to them about it, and that's when you're going to be able to expand on your experience. So there's certainly nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, good. I think if there's ever a place for confidence, then it's when you're applying for a job.
Absolutely.
Next question, we get into the main event. So we've covered our cover letter, and then we're going to get into the CV. Before we get into that, Paul, I've had lots of people ask me about the difference between the term resume and curriculum vitae. Are they the same thing, or they're just in an interchangeable term, or are they different?
People do tend to use the same thing. Some call it a CV, some call it a resume. CV, as you would well know, Nick, given your Latin history background, curriculum vitae means course of life. So your CV is the whole of your history, your full working history, all your academia, etc., etc., etc. So the whole thing. That doesn't necessarily change that much apart from being added to as you go along, whereas the resume is a summary of job experiences, and these experiences that are most relevant to the role that you're going for. So your resume needs to change all the time. So pointless putting in a resume for a nursing job if all your experiences haven't been in that industry. You need to make sure that those experiences are relevant to the role. And you can do that without leaving any gaps. There's no reason why you can't do that. But a resume is the shorter, succinct version of your CV.
Excellent. Okay, good.
Okay.
So the next mistake that I think nurses often make is being able to adequately articulate their accomplishments. And that's what this, like Paul just said, about what you've done that's relevant to the role and what's really important. And this is a time for you to showcase your accomplishments. And I think a lot of people confuse responsibilities with accomplishments. So sometimes as a result, this part of the resume can read a little bit like a position description and just rattles off all of the tasks that you performed in that role rather than how you executed them. When the successes are articulated and you do articulate those accomplishments rather than just rattle off a whole series of skills and tasks, a lot of people make the mistake that they don't make them quantifiable. And I think making sure that things are quantifiable is really important. For example, if you did a quality improvement project on a ward that you were working in as a registered nurse, and you identified a way that and a process in the clinical pathway for a patient who had a total hip that meant that they got up and were able to walk around sooner, there's not a lot of point in put in, I demonstrated my revised clinical pathway helped patients mobilise quickly, because that might mean that they got up on day 7 instead of day 8. You really want to know that it's a meaningful difference, and if it's 2 days instead of 8, and then that's important. That's a very significantly different thing, and you want those quantifiable differences. I often find in this part of the resume that people have a temptation to include a mission statement or their general philosophy about what they do in and what they want out of nursing. Paul, I suspect that you and I might differ on this because lots of career development professionals that I've spoken to have had a very different view about this. But what do you think? When I think about that, when people include that philosophy in their resume, I think it's kind of a bit meaningless because it's not something that you've been able to achieve yet. It's something that you'd love to achieve and say how you'd represented yourself. But there's not a lot of real estate in an application, and to use some of it on this inclusion seems a little wasteful. But I am seeing it more and more on CVs, in particular graduates. So I'm wondering if there's a lot of advice about including that.
I always make sure, I think career objective is one thing that's sort of just gradually disappearing and being replaced generally by career summary. But in your case and in the case of your clients, I would be writing at the start of your resume, you've got your name, you've got your contact details, your professional summary. Now, if part of that professional summary mentions the fact that you have a love for nursing or you want to dedicate your life to helping others, that's fine. There's no problem there. So your professional summary is a snapshot of who you are as a professional person. And that does include something about where you want to head to and what you want to achieve and so forth. That's fine. There's no problem there. But put all that under a professional summary, and it can be just dot points. I think we mentioned earlier about your cover letter. Make sure that's paragraphs and not just dot points. But in this situation, under your professional summary, that can be dot points, or it can be simply an 8 or 10 line paragraph about who you are as a professional person.
Yeah, I'll refer to the career summary later, but as someone that has reviewed untold thousands of applications, the career summary is often the part that I flick to most. So I'll read the cover letter and then go and have a look at the career summary. And if those two things intrigue me, then I'll have a more in-depth look at the CV. So I think that career summary couldn't be more important in terms of just none of the detail, just roles that you had and dates, and a quick succinct information about education. So excluding even the facility where you got that education and the time, just what they are, and you can have a look and get a real sense about whether this person might be a fit or, more importantly, might not be a fit just on those two documents. So I think you're right there about including a career summary, and if you want to include that philosophical statement, then that could be a place to do it.
Yep, that's fine. And we get back to what we mentioned last week. It's the skills, the attitude, the fit. Now, the philosophy does fit in there with the attitude a little bit. Okay, so it's the skills is what your qualifications are and your experience. The attitude is how you're going to get on with others, etc. But what you believe, what you want to do, what your aims and goals are, and then they combine those two to get the right fit. Yeah,
no, I agree. So in terms of being able to get away from a set of accomplishments that are just rattling off tasks from your position description and getting into what it is that you actually do, I tell people to use the age-old SWOT analysis. And I think that's a really good way of just getting a pen and paper before you start updating your CV and working out what your strengths are. What are you really, really, really excellent at and really, really comfortable at? What are your weaknesses? What are the things when you're at work that you feel like you could do better or that you haven't quite got the experience? What's the opportunity? So this particular role, and this is where it's important and where you can start crafting your resume to match the role that you're applying for, is that you start to look at the opportunity of this particular role and what it will give you and why you want it. And then think about the threats. The threats isn't so much important in this exercise, but it is a good opportunity because threats in this context are referred to as the external threats. And it's a good idea to start thinking about the fact that you can do everything that you can, but you can't control who else applies on the day. So sometimes it's a good idea to think, if the dream nurse applied for this role, what are the things that that person would have that I wouldn't, where I need to think about as I develop and maybe focus on other areas to amplify the strengths that I do have and that I do bring. And that also gives you the opportunity to look at all four of those things, is that process will reveal a few rare combinations that only you have, and that others may not possess. So you might have a combination of great credentials and skills and experience that position you really, really perfectly for the particular specialty, clinical or education or research or whatever it is that you're applying for. Other things, I think, in the accomplishments, as an employer or potential employer looks at your accomplishments through your various roles, is that there should be some evidence that growth and increasing responsibility and development is demonstrated. So from your very earliest role and as you have progressed through, that there's an evidence that your skill set has advanced as you went. This area is a time to focus on the skills that you possess. And it's a good idea. Sometimes it's difficult when in the 2 weeks before a job close, when you find the advertisement, sometimes it's really hard to think back on all of the things that you have done since you updated your resume last, and it may be 5 years, maybe 10 years since you updated your resume. A career journal can be really helpful, and most of us have smartphones now, so it's a good thing maybe just to keep a continuous note in your iPhone of things that you've done that you think you would be useful when you do update your resume. And it might be a project, a working party that you're involved in, and a good idea to jot it down there and then. I know that a couple of years ago I fell into being a study coordinator for a research project in a new flu drug. I hadn't done that before, so I found my way through that process, but at the end the research assistant that was helping me had said, this would be a really good thing, Nick, for you to put in your CV, because not many people have been a study coordinator of a study this size. And she gave me a whole load of language that would be relevant to that, and I jotted that down. And if I hadn't done that then, and I look back now, I wouldn't remember how to articulate that as well as I did at the time, because it was really fresh in my mind. So I think that's a good tip, so that you're not too overwhelmed at the time. And as you said, Paul, as well, this is a time for dot points, definitely. The great thing about dot points is it's a really great way to add emphasis to your accomplishments and highlight your skills, and they're really easily able to catch the eye of the assessor that's scanning through when there's not a lot of superfluous language in the sentence structure. You can just see in that dot points all of the things that you can do as a registered nurse. Have you got any other ways of getting people to showcase their accomplishments in the best possible way?
I like your thoughts about keeping a career journal. It was a bit like last week we spoke about the portfolio. Maybe you combine them both, that all the sort of little certifications you get along the way and recognitions that you get, that you keep them in one place. Now, whether that is electronically or in hard copy in a portfolio, it's just great to keep those and have them in the one spot, even going as far back to your qualifications and your marks from university and the like. Have them all in the same place. When I talk to clients about resume writing, I said, okay, let's get into your career history. This was the last job or your present job. What's the scope of that role? And that's 3 or 4 lines to say the role was such and such with a such and such organisation. Then I put key responsibilities, not the whole lot of them. I don't put 25 different responsibilities for each job, but the key responsibilities that you had, because that's going to be the same as anybody else who had that role. And then the most important thing is to put accomplishments, and measurable accomplishments. Now, treating patients on a daily basis is not an accomplishment. That's certainly something you did, but that's just a job responsibility. However, one nurse of the month due to my treatment of placements, or I was recognised by my superiors and sent to a conference or promoted in a role. Things that you can actually measure. Now, it's a little bit harder in some jobs than others. If you're an accountant, for instance, or if you're a salesperson, you can really write down measurable accomplishments, that you increased revenue, or that you came in under budget, or whatever that might be. But you can do the same in any particular job. So your accomplishments are about what you did in the role, but how then you performed it to such a level that it was measurable and recognisable, etc. So when you're talking about your job, you've got your role, the scope, your key role descriptions, and then your accomplishments, and as many accomplishments as you possibly can, and not just repeating what's in your role description, not just saying, yes, I turned up for work every day, well, wacko. You make sure that they're able to be measured, and that's what's going to set you apart from the other people going for the role.
Yeah. So I think for a nurse who worked, say, in an oncology ward, you might say, I was a senior registered nurse in a 30-bed specialist oncology unit, and the scope of that role, and maybe talk about the case mix. I think that's one of the things that, as an employer, you want to see what type of patients you would have looked after in that ward. So whether it was a mixed medical ward or, it was all oncology patients, those sorts of things are important. And what duties you held. So clearly patient care, but it's probable that you might have taken on some other roles and portfolios as well. So perhaps you looked after the infection control portfolio for the ward, or you were one of the preceptors for new staff. And accomplishments for that sort of registered nurse might be like what you'd said about, I was recognised as the VIP for the hospital for the month, or went to was rewarded with going to a conference. Quality improvement processes, you identified an infection control risk which reduced infection rate, or there's some roster engineering process, or those sorts of things are the things that I think that should be dropped into the accomplishments.
Absolutely. No, spot on.
Right, so for our next one, this is surprisingly one of the most common errors ever, which is pretty amazing. The careless errors. I'm not sure how many times I've been referred to as Dear Manger instead of manager. Spelling errors, grammatical errors, large sections of the CV locked off because you've used an old CV accidentally and uploaded that instead of the current one. Some people have sent me a copy of their Word document with the track changes still active, so that's always interesting to see what they decided to cut out. I've surprisingly had lots of applications that have been addressed to another potential employer. So instead of Dear Nicole Nash Arnold at Brisbane Northside Emergency address, it was Dear Joe Bloggs at the Royal Brisbane, and the cover letter starts, Dear Nicole, I'm so excited about this opportunity to work for your hospital, except that you didn't get the hospital right.
Oh.
Nice. Lots of applications that have been included with no contact details on them at all, which for the most part, if they have uploaded them, they were required to put in an email address, but there's the odd occasion where people do still hand in the hard copy, and then there's no way to contact them. Another mistake I think I see lots of people do is they don't include their professional email address, and they use their personal email address, which is appropriate when you're applying for a job outside your current role, to use your personal form of communication rather than the facility that you're working for. But just take a look at what your personal email address is, because no employer wants to write to their potential new employee to the email address that's hotsexythang@hotmail.com. It's a critical error that I see quite a lot, because it is the first true test of your written communication style. And if if you can't get this right, which should have been poured over and checked multiple times, then I'm not going to have a lot of faith in you that you can document a patient's notes accurately, or document a critical incident to the level that's required, or document the notes as a patient deteriorates. So it's an important acknowledgement that it's a real test of your communication style, written communication style. Paul, have you seen some interesting errors in some resumes?
Yeah, no, it's all ringing a bell. The Hotmail thing, get rid of Hotmail. Hotmail's when you're a teenager and
Yes.
you break up with your girlfriend over Hotmail. From then on, get rid of Hotmail. It's all about your brand, like we spoke about last week with the social media, and that's another one. It's Facebook, it's Twitter, it's your Hotmail or otherwise. That all makes up who you are as a person applying for a job. So don't do that. And you get so many applications for jobs these days that you only need an excuse to say, look, I'm not going to put that person on. I've got 100 others here. Here's someone who's so careless that can't even spell things correctly. So I'm just going to put that to one side. That's a reason for a recruiter to say, nah, you're out. Yeah. You might be the best qualified of the whole lot, but if you're so careless that you can't put in something that's grammatically correct and spelled correctly, you're not going that far. So there's no excuse these days. And then people say, okay, look, I spell checked it. Well, that's okay. You can spell check manger, and manger's a word, so that won't come up as a mistake. Exactly. So get somebody else to read your cover letter and your resume. It's as simple as that. You can read something 4 or 5 times yourself. You won't pick up a mistake because it's just ingrained in your head. You just overlook it all the time. So get a third person to read your cover letter and your resume. And if you can't do that, you're in for some trouble, I think.
Yeah, and this is where that concept that a resume won't get you a job, but it will take you out of the running for a job is so important. Because when I have a lot of applications, I'm looking for reasons to cull. You are literally shortlisting, and so you might have 20 applicants and you need to get it down to 3 and 4. And if there are errors like that, then I think, well, then, your written communication style clearly isn't up to where I expect when someone can present something really, really beautifully. Yeah. So I think that's really important to be able to make sure that you do showcase your documentation skills. Absolutely. And as you'd said, Paul, get someone to have a look at it. Yes. Sometimes people either get no one to have a look at their resume, or they get 100 people to have a look at their resume, and that can be really stressful because then it's death by 1,000 cuts as everyone puts their 2 cents in. So I think the trick with the one mentor, and I think this is important as well with the accomplishments, is someone that you respect and that you know that they can, they have the skills and knowledge to look at it. And it doesn't have to be a clinical person because they're not reviewing the job for your suitability for the role. They're reviewing you for the suitability of the way in which you've presented yourself in this written format. Yeah. So just find that one person that you trust and give them some boundaries about, this is, obviously you're not going to look at the clinical part because you're an accountant, but, could you have a look at the content and the grammatical error and the style and the review and all that kind of stuff. So that's really important. And yes, you're right, I think, get rid of Hotmail.
Get rid of Hotmail. And the one mentor that you do get, make sure it's somebody who is going to be able to give you honest feedback. Your mum and dad will be, oh, well, that looks fantastic. That's great, and it's always nice to hear you've done the right things. But you want someone to say, look, do you understand that, errors is ERRS and not just ERROS?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Excellent. Right, so my number 4 error is a rubbish format. I see this reasonably commonly as well. And I'm not sure why this is quite a common problem, because it's not hard to Google, the sort of formats that you might use, on Google and get a sense of how a professionally presented CV should be formatted. But about 5 years ago, when we were in a grip of a nursing shortage, it wouldn't be surprising if I had no responses for an ad that I put out. And while the nursing shortage is far from resolved, the world has changed a little bit, and it probably won't stay that way. But I now get multiple applicants, probably not 20, but I would get multiple applicants for a role now. So gone are the days when just shooting through anything to an application for a registered nurse's role means that just the fact that you're an RN with a heartbeat means that you'll get the job. So you do need to work harder than you may have been accustomed to 5 or 10 years ago, and re-expressing yourself in a proper formatted CV is incredibly important. Formats that are truly awful, the general rules of the formal letter are generally ignored, so you won't have the date followed by the name of the person that you're applying for with their title and the name of the facility and the address, and then dear Mrs. Nash Arnold, and then the expressing an interest for the following position advertised on seek.com, and then the properly formatted paragraphs, and then signed off with yours sincerely. They're the sorts of things that a professional letter look like. You're not writing to a friend, you are writing in a professional way. Other times there it seems to be just chunks of information all over the place, like you'd had a thought, oh, that's right, I did that course in Melbourne, that was really important, and I did that other one in Brisbane, and I had that job for a while, and it doesn't seem to have any kind of rhyme or reason. Fonts that are really tiny so that you can keep your CV short are really hard to read, and it's exhausting when you're doing a lot of CV culling when you're reading that sort of thing. And the same with really heavy black bold type can be really hard to read when you're perusing applications. On the very odd occasion, a nurse will opt for a very detailed decorative template that's full of graphics and pictured florid embellishments. Sometimes photos of themselves. I'm in two minds about the photos of themselves, but I don't think there's any place for a very florid, flowery, decorative CV. Paul, after you've seen, I imagine, a great many resumes, what do you think makes the proper format of a CV stand out from the rest?
Look, I think there are some basic rules. The length of a resume shouldn't be any greater than, say, 4 pages on average in Australia.
Yep.
A lot of graduate resumes might only be 1 or 2 pages, and a very senior level executive resume might be 3 to 5, but around about 4 pages is right. The font's an interesting one. The decorative type scripts, it's just too difficult to read at times, and sometimes are not even legible, so it's not going to win you any extra votes. So just use a standard font, whether that be Arial, Tahoma, Calibri, any of those sort of regular ones that are easy to read and are common. They're
Yep.
fine. The font size, no smaller than 0.10 and no greater than 12 is a general rule, because we want to fit as much as we possibly can on the page. And then sometimes people put a really massive name at the top inside their header that intrudes onto the too much space into the context of the document. You want the content's the most important thing, not how it looks. So make it look standard, but make it look readable and legible. And that's you're right about the pictures and decorations and stuff. If you're going for a job as an art gallery manager, well, that's fine. But
Absolutely.
You're not. You're going for a professional role as a nurse, so make it look professional.
Yeah, no, I agree. I often tell people that they should have reverse chronology, so their most recent role should be first.
Correct.
And the the anatomy of a good resume should include your contact details, the career summary. We talked about that before. I think that's the most important part of the whole document. Your experience, and that's the part that's documented in reverse chronology. Education, also reverse chronology. Professional associations, and then your references. Obviously, if you're going for an academic position, then you may want to change that so your education's at the top and your experience is second. But largely, I think for the most part, that's a fairly standard and expected format because I don't need to, think if it was 20 years ago that you're a graduate nurse, I don't want to start in 1977. I want to start with where you are now and then work back to see. The only reason I look back in the reverse chronology is just to see that there is a reasonable job history. There aren't major gaps, and sometimes there are, particularly in nursing that's largely women. People have babies. But you want to see whether, there isn't a glaring obvious discrepancy in the chronology and that there is a progression in the skills and the development. And it's clear and predictable headings, I think, are key, that it's aesthetically pleasing and avoid those graphics and images. There's never a place for personal information like marital status, age, children, because it's irrelevant. And in our world with the anti-discrimination laws, sometimes that information can put you in a bit of a difficult position as an employer, and it's easy not to know. So I think that there's no place. And I'd say the same about hobbies. Do you agree with that, Paul?
I agree with that. Yeah, no, I agree with that. Look at the inclusions. I've got to include your personal details, obviously, your career summary, your key skills and competencies, I think is really important, and link those into the role that you're going for. Your personal attributes, that's up to you. It's neither here nor there to me. Certainly in a nursing role, technical skills would be important. And then your employment history, which you're exactly right, Nick, that you go chronologically from the most recent to the furthest away. Now, anything past 10 or 15 years and any qualifications over 10 or 15 years may not be relevant anymore, particularly say in IT these days. It changes so quickly that anything over 3 or 4 years old is not relevant anymore. So be careful of that. You don't need to put your VCE results if you're in your 40s. That's too long ago. So your qualifications, make sure you put the relevant ones in, and then your professional referees, and then the irrelevant information are things like you don't have to put your date of birth. You don't have to put your marital status. You don't even have to put your gender. You don't have to put family or personal information. You don't have to put your graduation dates. If you're worried that, gee, I'm over 50 and if I put a graduation date, they're going to be able to work out that I'm 52. We don't have to put that. You don't even have to put whether you're a smoker or your health status.
No.
There are some optional inclusions. Some people talk about the address. Well, you don't have to put the address, but that might help you putting the address. If they see that you're going for a job and you in Brisbane and you live in Brisbane, they're not going to have to worry about having to relocate you, or that they're not going to be afraid that down the track you might want to head back home again. So I'd put that in.
Yeah, I agree.
Your hobbies, it's up to you. If you've got a hobby that's relevant to the role that you're in, well, why not? I certainly try to encourage people to put some voluntary stuff there and community stuff if they've done it. I reckon that's really good and it looks good. And but certainly there are some of those things that you don't need to put in.
No. And this is where you really flesh out the accomplishments in really only the very recent history. Your accomplishments in 1977 in your graduate year, I don't need to know that. So really only flesh out those most recent ones.
Yes. And sometimes even in your email address you can have some giveaways. Some people have their year of birth as an email address because they can remember that. But that then sometimes counts against you. Yeah,
no, I agree. Our last mistake, and it's probably the one that causes the most angst, and it's not part of what makes, it's not a requirement of every single role for every single facility that we go for as nurses, but certainly large-scale public bodies like Queensland Health, for example, will require that, and that's key selection criteria. Paul, we could spend a whole session on key selection criteria, I think, but they do cause a lot of anxiety, don't they?
No, they do, but and you're not expected to have done everything that's in the role in the criteria. Otherwise, you'd be in that role working already. This is a role that you're going for that's probably at a higher status than what you're currently doing, but there'll be things in there. They might say, look, the ability to, lead a team. Well, that's okay. You might not have led a team yourself, but you might have led a small group, or you might have taken people away on a seminar and been in charge of something. So there'll be something relevant that's not necessarily exactly the same thing, if you know what I mean. There will be experiences that you've had. So it's like saying, look, if you've coached a kid to kick a footy at under 14 level, well, you're probably able to then coach a team to play the game in under 16s. And that's fine. So there will be things either in your experience or in your qualifications that are going to enable you to carry out these key responsibilities or the key criteria. So that's what you need to refer to. Look, I haven't done exactly that, but I've done such and such. So indicating that it's not far away from what these selection criteria are.
Yeah. I often...
there are some that if you need a certificate for or a graduate diploma and you haven't got it, well, that's a different story. But
that's right.
That qualification is not so much the key criteria.
No. I think that this problem is a little similar to what we talked about last week with interviews, where people say either too little or too much.
Yes.
And a great strategy to counter that is what we talked about last week, which is using the STAR. And I know you've got a simpler version of it, but it's really... when you look at these key selection criteria, they're asking for demonstrated experience in whatever, so the quality cycle or infection control or, whatever it is. And that STAR process of identifying, what situation related to the quality improvement cycle that you're talking about. So what was the situation? What did you think was required and why? What action did you take to address that problem that you identified in that quality improvement cycle? And most importantly, what was the outcome? What's the result?
Exactly.
Paul, do you want to talk about your PAR process?
Yeah, as you say, PAR's a problem that you'd encountered in the past, the action that you took and the result that you got, the PAR. So you're exactly right. Look, I haven't done infection control, but I did do such and such, which I addressed by doing this, and then as a result, this was the outcome. So you're exactly right. If that helps you, if those little acronyms help you, fantastic. So just try to keep referring to that. They say, oh, look, I know what they mean. I haven't done it, so I won't talk about that. Well, that's not going to win you any points. You need to address something similar to it at least.
Yeah, and I think for the most part that's why probably PAR is really good for this, because a lot of what we do in nursing is problems-based.
Yes.
And the patient will come to you with a problem, or the ward will have a problem, or the community health service will have a problem, and you need to work through that. So, and that's what a potential employer is working out, because we all have problems in our health service delivery, and you want to employ someone that comes with an approach where I've got this problem, these are the actions that I took in this situation, not perfectly aligned with the question that you're asking, but a problem, I took action and I got results. So I think that's a really important way to approach key selection criteria.
Yep.
Once you've written them, I think one of the mistakes people make is they don't necessarily go back to the position description and make sure that all of the key accountabilities in the position description that you're going for are suitably reflected in those key selection criteria. So if they want you to demonstrate, knowledge or the ability to acquire knowledge in infection control, that features somewhere in your key selection criteria.
Yes, exactly.
Excellent. Do you have any other tips for people to work through key selection criteria?
No, not really. Look, I think you've covered off everything there, Nick. It's just important that people understand that this document is them as an individual, and it's going to separate them from everybody else. So add that personal touch to it, even if it is a coloured heading or whatever that might be. So long as you don't take away anything from the professional look of the document, but it's talking about you as a person and separating you from everybody else and saying, well, look at this cover letter, look at that, that's all relevant, it's all in sync, it's all consistent, there's documented evidence of achievements and so forth. This person's someone we want to have a talk to.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. And then you're through to that next level, which is what the whole purpose of this is about. It's not to get you the job, it's just to get you to the next round, to be able to sit in front of the panel and talk about your experiences.
Yep.
Mm.
I have I have a really good checklist for resumes. If anybody wants one, they can just email me, and I'll happy to send that back through. But it's just sort of, have you got consistent use of text and formatting?
Fantastic.
Have you got career objectives? All that sort of thing. It's all there. So if anybody wants that I might send it through to you anyway.
Yeah, well, Paul, I've got, for those people listening that feeling like they want more help, then I've got a link on my website, nursemanagerhq.com/resume, where you can download the resources. So this webinar, as well as the slides and some other resources that I put together, and I'll include that as well, so that people can have that as well.
Yep, fantastic.
Nicole and Paul, thank you for a very interesting presentation.
Thank you, Sue.
Now, may I ask, I was talking to a medical officer the other day, and we were actually talking about resumes, curriculum vitae, and I like the differentiation you make in regards to the, course of whole of life as opposed to recent and relevant. He was saying, as a medical officer, if there's a gap in his CV, then that causes alarm bells to ring. So what if you have taken a year off to go backpacking through, I don't know, Nicaragua? How do you structure that? How do you identify to people? It's not, I'm not telling you where, I'm not hiding where I was working. It was just I wasn't working as a nurse.
No, that's fine. That's personal leave, holiday overseas. There's nothing wrong with that. It's like people when they go and have babies, they say, "Oh, no putting there. I wasn't working, so I'll leave out that 4 or 5 years when I grew a couple of lovely children." Just put that in as family leave. There's nothing wrong with that. So then it's doesn't become an issue because there's no gaps. So if someone says, "Oh, what's that personal leave there? I went away and lived overseas for 12 months." Well, that's fine. All of a sudden it's not a discussion anymore, so there's no issue. But if you don't have it in there and leave them guessing, you might have been in prison for 12 months. They don't know. So
that's what I was meaning.
So I'd put it in. I'd put it in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you use the word like word like sabbatical, which indicates that you weren't unemployed or you weren't sacked and it took you a year to get a job, but you actually took leave, particularly for men?
You could take a working holiday. Look, so many people do it. Everyone seems to think they're entitled to a gap year now, Nick. So once they finish year 12, off they go.
Bit of resentment there, Paul.
Well, no, they work
we
so
missed
hard.
our gap year.
Work so hard in all their school years, they need a year off.
I think one should have a sabbatical every 5 years or something.
Really?
I do too, Sue. I agree.
The other thing I welcome the fact that you talked about accomplishments and in regards to, and you provided some reference, Nicole, to the history of nursing and, that if you were breathing and you were able to walk, that they would take you. Whereas now there is far more competition and it's not just enough to go to work and do the tasks.
No, it's not.
If you want to be able to identify accomplishments in a job application, then you're going to have to put yourself forward and above your colleagues to be able to establish those accomplishments to put them in your CV.
Yes, no, it's really important now. And I think there was a little bit of laziness that grew in the nursing collective and a lot of us had that experience where you'd ring a manager and they'd say, "Great, come in, we'll do an interview." And it wasn't really an interview. It was just let's satisfy the HR department. And then you were like, "Right, when can you start? Orientation's Monday. Can you start Monday?" And it's not like that anymore. There is more competition. It's not enormous and it's not overwhelming and there's not 100 applicants for every role, not in the circles that I speak with anyway, but there is more competition than there was several years ago. So you do need to be able to say, "I do more than turn up."
Yeah, that's right. And if you indeed are planning your career path, then you need to be thinking about the next job in the job you're in.
Exactly right. That's the first first step of getting the next job. It doesn't start when you find the ad and you whip up your resume and you send the application in and you go for an interview. It's ongoing all of the time, which is why that career journal is so important, where you just have some mechanism where you write your accomplishments, because sometimes it is hard to think of them on the fly.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. That's the best idea, Nick, to just jot them down or record them somewhere and make sure that, because you do, all of a sudden someone asks you a question, you think, oh, I did something 3 years ago, but I can't quite remember what it was.
Yeah, exactly.
Have it documented somewhere.
Yeah, career journal's a great idea. The other thing I was going to ask you in regards to, and it came under section 3, I suppose, careless errors, and you talked about not wanting to have a resume, full of my nicely drawn flowers and pictures of me dancing through the meadow. But what is the expectation? Like, is it that it is a printed resume and it's in a display folder, or is it okay to send it electronically? Do you PDF it? Do you leave it as a Word document? What's the expectation for the way in which the look of the presentation?
I think you, as we said, you have it as a document that can print off, and when you get to the interview, you take some extra copies with you. But by doing it on computer, obviously you've got an electronic copy as well. So it's the professional look of the document. Just 4 pages stapled in the top left-hand corner is enough. You don't need to dress it up any more than that.
When people, on the odd occasion, and not so much anymore because for the most part applicants submit their application through some sort of portal like Seek or standalone, but for the hospital. So most of them are submitted electronically. But for the odd occasion where people submit it, folders really bug me, because I've always got a stack and I have it sitting on my desk, and when I've got all of these mismatched different sized folders on a very practical level, it's really difficult to keep that tidy and organised and carry it around. So I'm a big fan of the 4 pages stapled in the top left. And
sometimes too, Nick, I should say, but there's some of bigger jobs where the initial resume is read electronically by a computer, that it can't read information in tables. So people put these lovely tables on their resume, but it's not helping themselves, because computers can't read that.
Oh, I hadn't considered that, Paul.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very much a modern day type thing. But
the trap for young players, that one.
Yes.
And you would always send a PDF?
I don't know about the PDF versus the Word document. PDFs are safer because no one else can edit them. So what they've got is exactly what you submitted. I don't know in what circumstance it could possibly be edited, but a PDF is probably preferable, provided that it's a relatively small size. It doesn't, once you PDF it doesn't become 3 megabytes.
Yeah,
because
exactly
that's going to be really difficult.
No, spot on. That's the safest way to do it.
And Nicole, Paul alluded to it before. Like, do your investigative work so you can actually address the application, to a person, to a name.
Yeah.
From what I see on Seek, most people will put, applications to be directed to Nicole Nash Arnold or whatever. If they don't, is it reasonable to ring the organisation and ask, say that you're looking to submit an application and you'd like to be able to address the letter to the individuals concerned?
I think you can. In fact, if you're applying for a position in a large hospital, you can often get through to Switch and say, what is the name of the nurse manager for the emergency department? And there's no reason, and you can say I'm applying for a role. So you don't even have to wait and, make your way through to the right HR person. Switch will be able to provide that information. If it's a smaller hospital or facility or a community-based facility or rural and remote, then you can ring and say, this is what I'm doing and I'd like to address it specifically to the person. And I think most people would find that a tick rather than a cross, that you'd wait, you'd invested the time to take that time.
Look, some great information provided this afternoon. And as Nicole said, that link that is in front of you there, at her website, Nurse Manager HQ, the link to more information on how to put your resume together and all the other things that Nicole offers via her Nurse Manager HQ website is available to you. Nicole and Paul, thank you very much for a fabulous presentation.
Thanks, Sue.
Today we've been listening to Nicole Nash-Arnold from Nurse Manager HQ and Paul Armstrong from Inner Sanctum Careers. To everyone who's listening, I wish you an absolutely fabulous day, and I look forward to seeing you online at another webinar very soon. Goodbye.